Hi, everybody. Welcome to the conversation. I am Maytha Alhassen. I think this is the first time that I'm actually hosting the conversation. It's a very special one, too. We have comedian, creator of Hulu's series Ramy, actor, star of HBO's special Feelings, and a Golden Globe winner, Ramy Youssef.
Hey Maytha.
Yay!
Hey Maytha. I'm glad to be the first guest on you hosting it.
Want to have it any other way. I also forgot to add one thing in that intro, that exuberant intro. You are also most recently a GQ star. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing that for the culture. Um, Before we dive into what you're here for, which is we're going to have a conversation about season 2 of Ramy. It was critically acclaimed for a season. You were nominated for a Golden Globe for your acting on that show, and you won it. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But season 2 drops May 29th. And again, it's already getting rave reviews. And we're going to delve deep. We have a whole 22 minutes, half hour to have this conversation. I want to start, though, by going a little bit back. And actually, before I do that, I want to be a little transparent. Ramy and I have known each other for about a decade now. So it's been quite a pleasure to watch this journey of somebody who started out working at an Apple store, going to school, going to acting classes, and then made his way through the comedy circuit in New York to LA. And now he's here doing all the things that I mentioned under the age of 30. I don't know if you guys can believe that, but that's absolutely true.
You did know me when I was at the Apple store, huh? I remember that. Man.
Yeah, you gave me solid tips.
Yeah,
solid tips. You were always a good friend. Basically, the moral of the story. But I want to go back to that even a little bit before. When, for you, did comedy leave a mark on your soul? That might sound pretty heavy, but was there a joke? Was there a set? Was there a punchline that for you transformed everything? This is my way of life now.
I think the first time I really experienced comedy was my uncle. Maybe I was 9 or 10, letting me listen to some Carlin albums that, my parents definitely wouldn't have wanted me to listen to. And I remember just like being really blown away by the perspective and how something so political could be so funny. And I felt like from a really early age, politics was just such a thing that was talked about in my household and kind of defined a lot of our, experiences as immigrants from the Arab world. And so Carlin just kind of blew my mind. I remember then afterwards, Jon Stewart really blew my mind, Chappelle, just all these people who I was like really in awe of. And then, for me, I was always making things. I kind of just like was, from an early age. I think I bought my first camera when I was in like the 3rd grade, back when like Amazon would take like 2 months to ship. But I was making things, and then it very slowly grew into like being on camera, writing, eventually became stand up, and then kind of circled back now with Ramy into, making things in a really, full way.
Yeah, what I love about your comedy and what the Ramy series does is that it is not ruled over by politics in a didactic way. Politics is interwoven into the story. So let's jump into the conversation of what Ramy is about. I've seen it written as semi-autobiographical. I really love the way that you describe it as emotionally autobiographical story of overlapping identities, of a family that has overlapping identities, Egyptian, Muslim, and Jersey folks. And all those matter, all those play into the story that you're telling about not just Ramy, the title character who you play in the show, his journey, but the people around him, his friends, his family, his mom and dad. What does it mean to continue to have a relationship as an immigrant in America, in Jersey, in a post 9/11 moment? In season 1, you did deal with what happened when the character of Ramy was in school when 9/11 happened in Jersey. But there is this atmosphere that's happening in the back of the story of these characters. And I just want you to delve into a little bit of why now, what's the urgency of the storytelling? And I want you to think about I'm sure it gets overdone how people talk about representation matters as a hashtag, but I love what writer Hanif Willis Abdurraqib says about representation, which is that representation can be simply the ability to imagine a shared experience with somebody who's larger than life, and how your characters do that work instead of just filling in for the Muslim experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, creating this family that is, and creating this character that I think the semi-autobiographical is obviously a big point, right? Where for me, it's putting a lot of emotions into the fiction space. And what I'm really interested, if there's one thing I'm really interested in representing in a show like this, it's actually a little bit bigger than even calling it straight up a Muslim story, but it's the story of someone of my generation trying to grapple with having genuine faith and being, someone who's driven by his ego, by desires, by the world around him, and still trying to hold on to his faith. And to me, that is the most interesting thing to try and zone in on, because I think that whether someone is a person of faith or not, everyone is really wrestling with their higher self and their lower self. And everyone is really trying to deal with, who they want to be and who they actually are. And so this show is about that wrestling match, and it's about a family that's going through that. And then we add the layers that they are Egyptian. Then we add the layers that they are Muslim. And then we add a lot of the specifics that they're from New Jersey. But, I think in terms of like representation, this often gets billed as like the Muslim show or something like that. And that's obviously like a very difficult thing to pin down, especially because a Muslim identity is so varied and is really not, it doesn't really belong to one race, one group, certainly not one family, definitely not one show. But those are the things that I think seeing again, like someone like myself, but who's really earnestly trying to be a part of his faith without mocking the faith, which is definitely something unique for comedy. Even some of my favorite references that I listed between Carlin and Stewart and Chappelle, maybe not Chappelle, but I would say between Carlin and Stewart definitely are like, Carlin jokes about God, like, for most of his comedy against God, so we certainly are taking a different approach here.
Yeah, and this season, there's an uptick around the stakes of faith. And there's an introduction of a new character. We're going to see a clip in a second. And let's just jump into it and see what a taste of the season tastes like.
I feel like I have this emptiness, like this hole inside me that I keep trying to fill, but I can't. And I've tried to fill it with sex and porn, but it only makes things worse. It's like the more people I'm with, the lonelier I feel. I went to Egypt to try and find something, and I just made my whole life worse. I want you to be my teacher. I want to take the bay. I want to kill my ego.
How do I know I'm not just another one of your desires?
I don't want to have sex with you.
I didn't think you did.
Okay.
So there's a very special character that's featured throughout this season. That's double Academy Award winning actor Mahershala Ali, who is a very interesting story of how he came into the show.
Yeah. He it was really cool. I mean, it was just like a friendly call from him. He's also a practicing Muslim, and he was just being very congratulatory and it was funny. I think he was like, I don't mean to be condescending, but I'm just proud of the work that you've done. And he was just being really nice. And it kind of turned into us realizing, oh, we should just hang out. That would be really fun. And I think, it was just nice to feel like, I made a friend. And then at a certain point, as friends often do, he's like, let me know if you need anything. And then after like about a week, I was like, hey man, so I might maybe about that part about needing something, like, do you want to be on the show? And he was very excited too. And I think at first we were like, yeah, 1 or 2 episodes. And then when we really realized we wanted him to play this character of the Sheikh, which initially had been planned as something that would happen towards the end of the second season, I really wanted to create a character who was a religious figure and leader that was like one we hadn't seen before. I think usually when we see religious figures, they're painted in a light that's kind of a caricature, or someone who is a massive hypocrite, like the priest who does cocaine, like whatever it might be, or something kind of cartoonish. And I really wanted to create someone who looked like the people that I know who've been transformed by faith and are like really just amazing people. Not that they're not complicated, not that they're not human, but they really are kind of beacons of the faith and of this belief. And I told him that's what I wanted to do with a character that I felt like really only he could play. And so it kind of went from this like 1 to 2 episode idea to being something that, is the backbone of our season, this relationship between Ramy and his sheikh.
Well, let's talk about a little bit of the framing that the media has kind of held on to with this character, and then talk about the process of how you develop the sheikh character, because I think people assume, oh, Ramy's Muslim, he knows how to write all these characters, which is so not how writing stories, how writing character happens. And again, transparency, I'm actually a creative advisor and a writer in Ramy's room, and I learned a great deal about this whole process through Ramy, through working on the show. But I've seen a lot of journalists, entertainment writers frame him as part of this emergence of the sexy cleric that borders between the religious commitment and sexual desire to create this taboo, but that's not actually what's happening. And also, I think that a lot of these writers don't come from a Muslim background, and they don't realize that for clergy, that is not a taboo.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of layers. Some of it, I think, was like trying to allude to, and it was really, I think it was even something that we realized in the room, which was funny because I think we were, pretty well into writing these things. And then, we were also saw like, I think before I even was aware of what, Fleabag had done, they had a hot priest.
Yes.
Obviously this is way different. So I think some of those parallels are
Mahershala is hot.
I mean, and I think part of it is just that he's hot. I mean, you can't really, you can't write that he's hot. He just is. And so, I do think though that in terms of framing around a character like this, it's going to mean different things for a lot of different people. Certain people are going to see him even as like mystical or something. But I think anyone who is within the faith kind of looks at him and is like, oh, this is a sheikh. This is what a sheikh is like. This isn't like, we didn't really even apply any sort of, anything other than this is someone who, again, is transformed by the faith, embodies it. And this is what a lot of these people do feel like. Yeah.
Let's pull back a little bit and talk about process around the characters. You have a sister character named Dina. You have a mother. You have a father. You have a racist, homophobic uncle named Uncle Nassim. You have a disabled friend who has muscular dystrophy named Steve, who's your real life friend.
Yeah.
How do you make sure to create full characters that stand in their truth? Let's talk about the process, and also the process around this in a time of Corona. You've been nonstop trying to put things together, and you had the added layer of not being able to do certain things to get the season prepared for your launch date.
Yeah, so there's 2 steps to the process, I think. So taking kind of the first part of it, I think as we're kind of crafting things that happened in this in this season, even especially, so much of it came from conversations with our performers, with our actors. I mean, you brought up Steve, the nexus of like kind of the idea we went with is based on a real life problem that he has as a disabled person. And just in him venting that to me, we built a whole episode around it, because I always want, in the same way that for my character, it's something that happens to me or I felt, and then we dramatize it, we turn it into something else. I want to afford my actors to kind of like have the ability to do that with their stories. And so doing that with Steve is obviously so natural, because he has such a mastery over his voice and over, his performance and what he brings to the table. And then a character like Dina, played by Maytha, who's amazing. her episode came out of a conversation with her where, you know, she was really open with me in discussing like experiencing alopecia and like how weird it felt for her to be like, you know, having this like massive thing happen to her and, you know, as a woman, but then also like culturally, because we come from the same faith, we come from the same culture, kind of worrying like, wait, is this because I did something wrong? Is this because did I get the eye? Did this thing kind of happen? And it's such a big part of our culture. And it's something that, when she first brought it up, it so struck me as like, we're talking about faith and this is like a big part of it that needs to be kind of discussed, because a lot of people like the Ramy character maybe come at it from this place of like genuine need to transform, but a lot of people approach faith from superstition and you know, from these elements of like protection and these elements of it's almost a more like defensive, you know, way into it, and so to see you know, her kind of grapple with that and the legitimacy or the non-legitimacy of that, you know, and kind of the history of that and all of those things again felt really real to her. And so like you watch that and you see her performance and you're like, whoa, it really feels like she's going through it. And it's kind of exciting because, you know, on a level she did. And so I think like that's something that's really exciting again for me. With it's not with every episode by any means, but when we get the opportunity to be able to do it, it's really cool. And then a lot of the times, again, it's like growing our characters to the places that we feel like they should go after we've learned about them. We learned about them from season 1, and then, you know, hopefully, you know, we learn more from season 2 and can kind of incorporate it. So yeah, making those things was interesting. And then also like getting this show out the door, obviously, like you said, the Corona situation provided its own layers of like, you know, we missed 3 days of shooting, which impacted actually a couple of the episodes we're talking about right now. It impacted the Dina episode. It had impacted a different one. And so it's figuring out fixes. And so like, you're constantly kind of being like, okay, well, you have to trust you've got enough pieces throughout a season that you can kind of, you know, this is a family, and it's almost like, okay, let me take this from here and this from here, and we'll figure it out that way. And, you know, we figured out a lot of things that I'm very proud of what we put together, but it's also been like this added layer of a creative challenge, you know.
And I just want to let folks know, make a little bit of the connection. When I said in the beginning of this episode that I didn't want to give Ramy the envy vibes, that's what the evil eye is connected to. So we have a whole episode exploring that if you're interested in looking into that. I do want to jump into making this not just in a time of Corona, but in a time of Trump. So I wrote this report about 100 years of representing Muslims in Hollywood and film. And well, TV and film in Hollywood. And there was something really interesting happening in the 2016 election with it. A lot of showrunners of shows like Homeland 24 were feeling guilty because they felt like they created storylines and characters that might have influenced and pushed voters in the direction of electing Trump. So there was this moment of reckoning. Hollywood was opening up to stories and characters, adding them to Legends of Tomorrow, to, you know, different types of shows, a Muslim character here, a Muslim character there, and your show gets greenlit after Trump gets elected. What does it mean to make your art in a time of Trump?
Yeah, you know, I think when Donald Glover won his Emmy, he said like thanks to Trump or something like that. There was like some moment. You know, so I think there's like a little bit of a recognition where I think what I less like to frame it as a time of Trump and more just as like a time of clarity and a time of reckoning of like, this is kind of who we are and who we've been. And so like, I less credit it to, I think all he's really brought to the table is kind of clarity of where we actually sit and where we are. And to make this show during that time, you know, it's definitely something that like the show doesn't need on a level. I think so many of the things, again, like, from where I started, what we're talking about here is like a story of someone grappling with their faith. In my mind, that's timeless. You know, there are political layers to this show, but the politics is mostly assigned to it because of the era that we're in, and less something that we even as like show creators put onto the show. So I think like things sometimes and identities are just inherently political, whether we want them to be or not. And so this is a show about people dealing with their loneliness and dealing with their problems. Some of those are a side effect of politics, but by no means are these things that like wouldn't be going on at any other time. So like, I don't really predicate anything that I make on the fact that this dude's in the White House or not. It really doesn't matter, nor does the plot really. He's barely mentioned, but it you know, so this isn't like a a middle finger to him by any means.
Yeah.
This is again like an opportunity for people to like meet people who are kind of in the middle of wrestling with different versions of themselves, which I think all of us are. And in that sense, this is a time in which that is very, very pertinent and I think, timely.
Well, what's really interesting is you have a knack for timing, because one of the next shows that you're working on is about Steve. It's about a disabled person and the disabled community, which gets very little play on air. So glad you are doing this work, but it's also somebody that our current president explicitly made fun of, was a disabled reporter. So it's such imperative work to be doing in this moment. Unfortunately, the conversation already went. We have to wrap up. In a couple of sentences, what are you most excited about people seeing this season on Ramy?
I'm just excited for the conversations that people will have. All of them, like in their totality. This is a show that is built to be loved. It's built to be criticized. It's built to be discussed. And I'm very excited to see that happen. And I just excited for people to laugh. Hopefully we could all kind of use that right now.
Thank you so much, Ramy Youssef, Golden Globe winner, GQ star. Thank you for coming on the conversation.
Thanks, Maytha.